Chris leads eBay's social impact work, focusing on the role of e-commerce in driving positive social change and empowering economic opportunity across disadvantaged and marginalized communities. With a deep passion, understanding, and commitment to social and environmental issues, working across both the NGO and business sector, Chris believes that business has the potential to be a force for positive change in the world, to make a real difference to the lives of the people and the planet. Now, prior to joining eBay in 2020, Chris spent 7 years on issues surrounding education and skills development in Ghana, India, and in South Africa. He then transferred into working more closely on how business can drive social impact, spending time at Marks and Spencer and our favorite ice cream place, Ben & Jerry's, where he led their social mission strategy in Europe, focusing on refugee and asylum rights. So you're going to enjoy our chat and learn yet again how leaders and business can really be a force for positive change in this world. Okay, so please enjoy my chat with Chris. Chris, it's so great to see you again. Thanks for taking time to chat with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me on, Rob.
So I'd like to start with a quote, and it goes like this: if you're going to create real impact, it has to be done with the same focus and level of intensity as your business. And that's a quote from Scott Tatelman. He's the co-founder of State Bags. And this is a company that supports American children and families in need in ways they need it most, where they give support for every bag purchased. And so I'm just curious, what comes to your mind when you hear those words and you hear about a business doing that kind of work?
I think we put such emphasis on business performance and an intensity that goes into what does it mean to be a business? What does it mean to be a business person? And at the same time, you've got these businesses out there that would label themselves as social enterprises or fair trade businesses or whatever you want to call it. They're having to do that. They're having to be great businesses, and at the same time, they exist to do something else in the world. They exist to deliver on a social impact or an environmental impact, and do that as well as they're doing the other part of their business. I mean, that's pretty hard. There's some out there that are doing great stuff. We're working with some at eBay I can talk a little bit about later, but that's what comes to mind, is that is an intense job, trying to run a business and drive an impact in the world at the same time.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way until I read that quote in preparation for our conversation, and it really kind of hit me in a different way. So yeah, the first thing that came to my mind is, I wonder what Chris would say about that. So thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about your background and some time that you spent in India and South Africa. And I'm just wondering, would you share what you were up to in those countries while you were there?
Yeah, so it was a few years back when I started my career. I was working for an organization that did research and sort of small scale development projects around vocational training, skills development. So I spent a lot of time in India, a lot of time in Ghana, and a little bit of time in South Africa. And it was really around how do you improve the sort of policy around, but also more so the practice around delivering vocational training. So as an example, I did quite a lot of work in rural India, amazing place. Would love to be spending more time there now. And working with smallholder farmers, female smallholder farmers, particularly around how do you develop good agricultural training, and what does that look like for women's co-ops, basically in rural India, and just fascinating stuff, trying to understand the sort of governance behind some of those groups, from the village level up to the wider sort of state level, and what does that mean when you're trying to get people to take on new agricultural practices and things like this. So that was a lot of what I did, was around that. Did some work around pro-port tourism as well, and how do you develop hotels and hospitality that is really about going into local areas. Everyone is more and more looking for that sort of authentic experience when they go on holiday, I think. But how do you do that in a way that that engages the local community, hires from the local community? And you can say, you know, in a place like India, you can say, oh, we're recruiting locally, but you might be recruiting from 2,000 miles away from a college, rather than the small village in which that hotel has come to make its money. So lots of stuff around that, and other areas around construction and things like this, but primarily around how do you work with marginalized communities primarily, and help them to develop good training.
What is vocational training?
So vocational training would be anything from plumbing to carpentry to agricultural. So anything where there's a trade involved, but it's got a real spectrum. And traditionally, I don't know if it'd be the same in the US, but traditionally in a place like the UK, vocational training would be sort of the poor cousin in many ways to higher education and university and college. But there's been a big push in recent years to try and change that, and for many reasons that we need many more people going into vocational training. And so some of what we did was around the stigma around vocational training as well, and seeing it as a viable pathway with progression pathways as well.
Do you have a success story or a story that sticks out in your mind about your time there?
It's a good question. So a lot of what we did was around research. I've got an odd story, if that's a helpful one. I remember I was 21, 22, so pretty fresh out of university, college, and desperate just to get, because we were based in the UK, but just desperate to get out to India and spend some time working on the projects. And I remember there was a new initiative that we started out about 15 or 18 hours outside of Delhi, and it came in, and who wants to go? We've got to represent. It's a new initiative. There's a sort of conference going on, opening the program, and everyone was like, "Not for me, thanks." And I was like, "I'm desperate. I'm going." So I remember flying out there, getting straight off the plane into a taxi. 18 hours in the taxi. Got there, couldn't sleep. Woke up in the morning on stage. 1,500 people as a 22-year-old. I was like, I've absolutely no idea what I should be doing here. Did this sort of speech about the program, straight back in the taxi, 18-20 hours back to Delhi, and then flew home. And I thought, okay, there's something in this that's rather odd. I can see why no one wanted to put their hand up for it, but also there's an element of, is this needed? Like, do you need? And I think that's sort of moved into some of the way I think about some of this work in the future. Is, back then, sort of development work, as international development work, as we saw it, was quite often about that, people flying in, showing their face, and flying out, and that's just ridiculous. So yeah, not any particular insight there, but a bit of an insight for a young 21-year-old trying to find his way in industry.
Yeah, I feel like at 21, maybe you can make that happen, but at my age, no way. I'd never be able to do that.
Me neither. I'd be asleep for a week after it.
You mentioned that you loved your time there, and I'm just curious, what was it about the rural areas in India that you have such fondness for?
It's a good question. I think anyone that's been to India, and it's a cliche, is you get off the plane and everything is different. The smell is different. Everything visually is different. There's so much going on. There's this sort of buzz that happens in India that you don't get elsewhere. But then when you get out of the cities and you get into rural areas, it's quite a different place, and the way of life is much slower. There's a level of interest and intrigue that people obviously have in you, and what are you doing there? And I don't know, there's just, if I could, I would move to rural India and set up life there, and would be very happy, I think. I'm not sure I could do it to the two young kids we've got right now, but I just love being around people in India, and the sort of compassion and interest that people have is I don't know, striking, more so than maybe anywhere else I've ever been.
Just curious, a thought came to my mind as you speak so fondly about it. When you see the challenges that they're experiencing currently, what do you think about? What do you think about with what's happening over there, and how they come together as a society?
think it's first and foremost, it's really sad, and it's not just in India where COVID is running rampant, obviously. But I think there was a lot of talk in the UK about probably 10 or 15 years ago, probably 10 years ago, around development aid going to India, given the scale of the Indian economy, and you've got a space program and these sorts of things. But the reality is, you've got hundreds of millions of people in India that are living below the poverty line, and if you've been to any slum around a city in India, you can see the living conditions. So I think, first and foremost, there's a little bit of sadness there, but there's also a lack of understanding, I think, of the reality of some of the situation in India, and there's things the Indian government obviously have, maybe not prioritizing their investments in the right way, and that's a different discussion. But with the level of vaccine inequality in the world as well, this is, I hope that some of our leaders in the West start to recognize that we're all in this together. We've talked about that a lot over the last 12 or 18 months. And, until we make sure that everyone has access to that vaccine, I don't know if we're going to come out the other side in the way that we all want to.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So you and I met through a mutual friend and a past podcast guest, Tom Rippon, who is founder and CEO of On Purpose. And it just so happens that you went through the On Purpose program, I believe, 2013, 2014.
Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah.
Can you share with us how that program impacted your thinking in business and in the world, and how you go about your work?
Yeah, it's a big question, Rob. So I start maybe with a bit of a background as to how I found On Purpose, because I think everyone that joins it has a bit of a different journey. So as I mentioned before, I'd spent sort of six, seven years working in the development space, in research, and was writing a lot around how businesses should change, and businesses should do this, and if they're going to train their staff in a certain way, or integrate certain things in their supply chain, they should change in this way and that way. At the time, I was like, I've never worked in a business, so I'm making all these recommendations, but perhaps I should spend some time in one of these businesses that I thought about. So I spent a lot of time sort of exploring, what does that look like? How do I make that move? Looking at supply chain jobs in large corporates, but to what extent people who've got a supply chain background. And my interest then was really around how business could drive development, and how business could sort of address poverty alleviation. So I spent a lot of time looking around, and just by accident found On Purpose, which for many people at that time had been the people that joined the program. And the program is you spend two stints at different social enterprises or social purpose businesses of 6 months each, and do training around that. A lot of people that found their way to the program were coming more from a sort of corporate career. So they're often ex-lawyers, ex-consultants, that were looking to use their skills in a more sort of socially impactful way. Whereas I was going slightly the other way, that I'd worked more in the NGO space and was looking at how could I make that link into working within a business. And so found my way on the program, and really for me was this moment of like, right, I need to know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life right now. And as many people that have been through that process, that's not a particularly energizing space to be in, if I'm honest with you. But the program, I spent 6 months initially at Ben & Jerry's, and 6 months at a UK retailer called Marks and Spencer, which has got a fairly strong sustainability program, and has done for a long time. And really for me, it was a voyage of sort of exploration and discovery, which was, what do I want to do, but what sort of environment do I like? What sort of business do I want to work in? Do I want to work in a business? Do I want to go back to the NGO world? And particularly through the time that I spent at Ben & Jerry's was, okay, there's very different ways that businesses can drive impact, because Ben & Jerry's wasn't about supply chain, really. There was an element of that, but it was really around how do you use this reach that you've got as a business to engage your fan base in a social justice issue. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. Can you do campaigning as an ice cream company? Maybe we talk about that a little bit later. But So for me, it was like, what sort of environment do I like? What sort of teams do I like? Not necessarily like what's the exact type of work I want to do forever. And really the outcome for me from the 12 months was, you're never going to get that. You're never going to know this is exactly the thing I want to do forever. And it's, fairly obvious for many people, I think. But for me, I was like, wow, okay, it's about the journey. There is no destination. And look for what's the next thing. How are you going to build your level of understanding and awareness in this space with the next move and the move after that, rather than planning everything out. It was how you make the most of what's happening right now. That was what I got out of it.
Can you share more? You talked about, maybe we can talk about that a little bit later with Ben and Jerry's, but let's talk about it now. How are they making an impact in the world through their ice cream selling? And we all love Ben and Jerry's, let's face it.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Great brand, great product. I loved my time at Ben and Jerry's. And so Ben and Jerry's model was really, you've got all these people that love cookie dough. How do you talk to them about something that matters? Like, that's it. That was the model. And so my job was really around heading that up around Europe. And Ben and Jerry's is pretty big globally, but around Europe, we were significant size in about seven countries. And we actually had activism managers, and still do, in those 7 countries, which is really weird for an ice cream company, but quite cool, I think. And so the model was exactly that, which is, we can get a message to a more mainstream audience than an NGO can. That's it, really. And so all of our focus while I was there, and it continues to be so for the Ben & Jerry's in Europe, is around refugee rights and asylum rights. It's all about displacement. And that was partly because of everything that was going on. I was there in 2015. We started to build the strategy then. Everything that was going on in the world then with what people called the climate crisis in Europe, but also things around Brexit. And I believe you had some political change at that time as well in the US. And so there was a lot going on in the world. Yeah. And lots of people talking about displacement, but we also knew that was going to stop, and there wasn't many businesses also talking about this issue. And many of the NGOs around Europe are pretty small, have a core membership, but don't necessarily get that message out more broadly. And that was the whole idea of Ben & Jerry's, was to try and get that message out more widely. And sometimes we did a good job of it, and sometimes we didn't, because it's hard. Like, it's really hard to get the framing of those messages right, and you've only got people in social media for a short period of time, and they're like, okay, it's ice cream talking about refugee rights, what on earth is going on? And there's a level of awareness you've got to start to build that maybe you don't have quite so much in the US, where people maybe know the story of Ben & Jerry's a bit more and get the idea of business playing in this space, which I don't think you get so much in Europe. I think it's growing, but certainly not from a sort of activist business mentality, I don't think, back then. So yeah, that was the model. We went to the first global refugee forum with Ben & Jerry at the UN in Geneva just before I left. So that was in 2019, I think. And we were there launching an ice cream about refugee rights, which is incredibly weird. But the reaction you get was, it's just like great that we've got businesses talking about this stuff. And if it engages one other person in this issue, that's a good thing, as long as you're not doing it to sell more stuff. But the reality is, you do drive loyalty from that, without doubt, I think. So yeah, great time. I spent some time with Ben & Jerry, really interesting characters, and they're out there doing their thing, trying to challenge money in politics in the US and other things. And that's what you want. That's what you want to see from leadership, I think. Yeah,
I was curious because they're owned by Unilever, which is a much larger conglomerate. How did they remain autonomous and be able to go, and be focused on this purpose? Maybe Unilever has a similar purpose. I didn't check into that. I probably should have, but if they don't, how were they able to continue in that way?
That's the question we used to get all the time, actually, because the acquisition was back in 2001, 2002. So it's been, 20 years plus. And what they did, and people sort of studied the acquisition agreement in detail, is that Ben & Jerry's retained an independent board of directors that looks after the social mission of the company. So there was an economic mission, make money for our suppliers, a product mission, make nice ice cream, and a social mission, which was to basically have a positive impact on the world. And the board of directors can hold Unilever to account on that social mission, which I don't think they've had to do in many ways, because they retained a level of independence from Unilever, stayed in Vermont, kept the head office in Vermont, even in the European office was outside of a sort of Unilever environment in the UK as well. So I think that, there was a Ben & Jerry's CEO as well that's still there. So I think they sort of retained this idea of go and do your stuff and put in place the governance to ensure that happened. And, what can we learn from that? And if anything goes wrong, well, Ben & Jerry's still slightly on the periphery then, I think, in some ways. But I think the models worked really well. Ben & Jerry's has thrived in that time. I think Unilever as a business also has, through the previous CEO and the current CEO, has really led with the idea of sustainable business and purposeful business. And there's a Unilever stat that gets rolled out quite a lot, actually, which is, their purpose-led businesses or purpose-led brands grew 2 point something times faster than the ones that wouldn't label themselves as sort of purpose-led over a period of time. So it's sort of seen as a bit of the poster child for sustainable business. And if they can do it with the scale that they've got, then I think, any other business can do it too.
Do you have a favorite flavor? Favorite Ben & Jerry's flavor? What is it?
I had two, Cherry Garcia and Chunky Monkey, mainly because we don't get it a lot in the UK. You've got to go to the shop to get it. You can't buy it in a supermarket. That's
great. Was there ever any discussion about a person's favorite flavor and what it means about their personality?
No, but we did have we had to have our own AKA. So I was the conqueror, which has no relevance at all, and feels a bit egotistical. But little subtle things like that make a business and make a brand and get everyone to buy into it, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Well, so now you're currently head of social impact at eBay, and you're leading what's called eBay for Change. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what that means and what it means for a company like eBay to be focused on social impact.
Yeah, so eBay has this global purpose around economic opportunity for all, and that is a big goal. And I think if you've got a goal like that, you've got to be quite proactive around how are you going to do something to change the world, and what is wrong in the world for you to need to change it. And so my focus is in the UK, but we've obviously got a broader global remit as well. But for us, it was how do we take that big goal and drill it down to something that is manageable for us and that works for us in the UK. And so sort of took that and said, okay, what does it mean for us? Well, actually, it's around economic opportunity for marginalized communities. So let's focus on marginalization. And then how do we use our business to take action, do stuff, but also to be an advocate for change. And so take a position on what's not working in the world. And I think that's really a deviation from where eBay has been in the past, and there's more to do there. And then really rooting that work in the need for a more inclusive, equitable, and regenerative economy, which again, they are all very big words. So then what does that really mean for us? I think there's sort of two ways into that. One is you could take the Ben & Jerry's approach, which is we're going to focus on working with one particular marginalized community. We're going to build up a level of knowledge and understanding within that movement and within the NGOs that drive that movement, which is one option. But actually within eBay, and eBay's got this, which is what appealed to me actually about eBay, is it has this focus of being for everyone. And there's very few businesses like that. And so it didn't really feel like there was a natural reason why we would pick one community over another. And so for us, it was really, what are those business models and approaches to doing business that are inclusive by design, so that are targeting economic opportunity for marginalized communities for the very reason for their existence, basically. And that's how we ended up with, we should really be about supporting the growth of the mainstreaming of the social enterprise movement and the fair trade movement. These are models that are proven, have been around for a long time, but haven't necessarily in many ways broken into the mainstream. So there's still your dedicated platform that you go to when you're thinking about, I want to buy a gift, for example, that is very clearly for people and planet, so that people will go to those marketplaces. But it feels like what we can offer is bringing their products to a more sort of mainstream audience. And so what it looks like really is it has two parts to it. One is we're working with Social Enterprise UK, so it's a membership body for social enterprises in the UK, and the World Fair Trade Organization, same thing, but for fair trade businesses and globally, to bring some of their members. And initially it's relatively small. We're working with sort of 55 businesses to begin with, to provide them with a package of support to get them to improve or learn how to utilize eBay in the best way. So that's a training program that lasts for sort of 4 months, 0 fees, that they don't pay anything when they're on the platform. And probably the most useful thing, a big push on the marketing side to try and drive awareness of these businesses within the platform. So that's one side, and the other side is more of an investment into the ecosystem. So it's a startup program, again working with a partner called Unlimited in the UK, that is trying to support earlier stage social enterprises to develop their e-commerce business. And the idea is they'll sort of graduate from that onto the hub and onto the platform. But we're really early stage. We launched it in June, and this is new for eBay. So we've got lots of learning to do before we go big.
How do you envision it looking, say, like 5 years from now or something like that?
Yeah, I think we don't know yet. Is the honest answer. I think what we hope is that two things really. One is that eBay will be the largest marketplace for social enterprises in the e-commerce world. That's very clearly a goal for us. And the second is, how do we grow outside of this space and be a platform for different approaches to doing business that have people and planet at their heart? There's lots around the circular economy. There's things outside of that in other sort of alternative economic models that maybe we could be the platform to mainstream some of that. But that's very much personally, that's the goal. But as a business, we're focused on how do we get this right, and how do we make sure that it works for the businesses that are coming onto the platform. Because there's a reason they haven't found their way onto eBay up to now, and that we're pushing them. So how do we make sure that there's a consumer demand there? How do we make sure that we're supporting them in the right way? How do we make sure that there's that interaction between the network of social enterprises that they need? Because again, back to where we started from, these are businesses that are trying to drive a great business, right, and drive impact. And running an e-commerce business is quite different to running maybe a high street retail business, where your impact model might be employing certain people that are distant from the labor market, training them up to work in that retail environment, and then moving them on to a future job. Whereas in e-commerce, it's more about logistics and fulfillment. And what does that mean? And how does that change the way you think about your impact model in your business? So these are all the things that are sort of at play. And that's why, we don't know yet where we'll get to, but that's all we're aiming for.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any good stories of businesses that you've worked with so far that are encouraging or interesting that you might be able to share?
Yeah, I mean, every business, say we're sort of starting small with 55, but every business is completely different, which you would imagine. They've got a different impact model. They're working on different things, but there's a few that I could sort of share, which would give you a bit of an insight into what some of these businesses look like. So there's one business called Change Please that started it's basically started in the streets of London, working with people that are experiencing homelessness, and was training them up to be baristas. So would get a London living wage job, get the training and the skills to sort of to sell coffee. And obviously during COVID, that's been, and then they donate a percentage or a large percent of their profits to homelessness organizations as well. Obviously during COVID, lots of those coffee locations have not been well frequented or had to close down, and so they've looked at how do they pivot their business to focus more on ground coffee and coffee beans, and you know that's part of that interesting dynamic around what does that mean for your core part of your model. How do you work with others, and how do you bring that impact into what you're doing as you sort of expand into this space? So I think they're a really interesting example. There's another called From Babies with Love that sells organic baby clothing and donates 100% of its profits to abandoned and orphan children around the world. And there's many more that have, you know, similar stories, and just basically start from an entrepreneur with a passion for that issue.
So for example, the Babies with Love, they donate 100% of their profits. So explain to me the difference between a nonprofit and a profit-based company that donates all their profits.
So it's a very gray area, there's no question, but I think what's at the heart of a social enterprise is that you exist as a business. So the way that you bring in your revenue is through a business model rather than grant making, and then you reinvest that back into your impact model. So that might be the same for some nonprofits. But we've got, for example, in the UK, we've got different legal structures that exist so we've got a thing called a community interest company, which means you exist to drive that particular impact, and it's built into your articles of association as a company, in comparison to maybe a charity which is regulated by the Charity Commission in a slightly different way.
That makes sense. I wonder if it's like a B Corp here in the United States.
It would be slightly different. So we get that question quite a lot, because as a B Corp, yes, you and big fan of the B Corp movement. Ben & Jerry's was a B Corp when I was there. But as a B Corp, you have to, you do your scorecard, you come out at a certain level, and you continuously improve. But I think what's slightly different with a social enterprise is that as a B Corp, you can tone up and tone down your impact depending on how you're doing as a business. Whereas as a social enterprise, you can't. You exist to deliver on that social environmental impact. And so if you're making money and not investing into that, you're not fulfilling your articles of association and the reason for you being, which makes it particularly tough, I would say.
So, and then the coffee business, Coffee for Change, was that the
Change Please? Yeah.
Change Please. So they had retail locations that couldn't be open during COVID. So they sort of pivoted and started selling their coffee online through the eBay social change platform, social impact platform.
Yeah, and other e-commerce channels as well. Yeah, exactly. So they're relatively newly into eBay, but exactly, they pivoted to do that, and then will donate, I can't remember exactly, but the percentage of their profits back into homelessness initiatives. Really interesting founder, loads of energy, and that's what you find.
Oh, I bet.
Founders, it's just loads of energy.
So I'm wondering, before we close our conversation here today, do you believe in your heart of hearts that business can become a force for positive change in the world?
It's a great question, Rob, and it's actually one that I think about a lot, actually, because I think I do believe in it, but it's very much driven by the personalities and the people within those businesses, whether it's a marketing ploy or whether it's actually embedded into who you are and what you want to be as a business. And I think there's two ways of approaching this work. One is you can start with, what do our consumers want to hear, and how do I shape a message to the things that they're interested in? And the other one is you can start with, what's the change that I want to make in the world, and then end with, how do I engage my audiences in that? And I think any business that does it in the first way, you're never going to drive any change in the world truly, because you're always going to be reactive to the needs of your consumers or the things that they're interested in that day. Whereas if you start with, this is the thing that we truly want to change in the world, we're happy to play our role in whatever small way that is, and be part of a broader movement that's trying to drive that change, then I truly believe that you can, and you can do that, while making money, and because you need to make money as a business to survive. But I think everyone's on a bit of a journey as to where they sit within that balance. And I think it then comes down to, have we got the right people within those businesses driving that are willing to hold firm on, this is the change we're trying to make, and using that checks and balances when you get questions back, which inevitably come.
It's great. Thank you to eBay for creating a program around this. And they're fortunate to have a leader like yourself to help move it forward into the future. And I'm excited to see how it transpires. There will be a link in the show notes so you can go to the eBay page for social impact and people can check that out and keep us posted along the way. I know we'll be paying close attention to everything that you're doing.
Will do. Really appreciate it, Rob. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you to all the loyal listeners out there. As always, I greatly appreciate you spending time with us today. And I wish you all much love and gratitude.